She had $11 in her purse, a broken furnace at home, and a sick toddler waiting for medicine she couldn't afford. And she still said yes. Beatrice Owens, a black woman raising 5 white boys that nobody in the foster care system wanted, gave everything she had to children who weren't hers. She fed them when she was hungry. She held them when she was breaking. She loved them when the world told her to stop. And the system took them away. Not because she was a bad mother, because she was a poor one. She never saw them again. 20 years of silence. 20 years of empty rooms and unanswered letters. Then, one Saturday morning, her doorbell rang, and the 5 boys she lost were standing on her porch. But they weren't boys anymore, and what they brought with them would change her life forever. Man, stories like this really hit you. Let's get into it. But before the doorbell, before the suits and the tears, before any of that, there was just Beatrice and a house that was never big enough. Memphis, Tennessee, 2003. Beatrice Owens was 42 years old. She lived alone in a 2-bedroom bungalow on a dead-end street in South Memphis. Peeling paint, chain-link fence, a patched roof that leaked when the rain hit sideways. Out back, a vegetable garden she tended every morning before the sun came up. Tomatoes, collard greens, sweet potatoes. She treated that garden like a church. The neighborhood was tired. Boarded up houses on every other lot. A corner store with bars on the windows. Stray dogs that knew her by name because she fed them scraps from the porch. Beatrice worked 2 jobs. Days, she cooked in the cafeteria at a public elementary school. On her feet from 5 a.m. to 2 p.m., serving hundreds of plates, minimum wage. 3 evenings a week, she drove her rusted 1994 Buick across town to restock shelves at a grocery store until midnight. Her husband, Lawrence, had died 6 years earlier. Heart attack on a factory floor. He was 41. No life insurance, no savings. She still owed the burial, a payment she made every month, $10 at a time, like clockwork. She kept his work boots by the back door, laces tied, as if he might walk in one evening, tired and smiling, the way he used to. Beatrice was not a woman who complained. She hummed gospel while she cooked. She left plates of food on her front porch for anyone who was hungry. When neighbors didn't wave back, she waved again the next day. She wasn't naive. She knew exactly how hard the world was. She just refused to let it make her hard, too. And then Diane Presley called. Diane was a social worker, overworked, underpaid, running on coffee and guilt. She'd placed dozens of children in foster homes across Memphis. Most of those calls were routine. This one wasn't. "B, I've got a boy, 12 years old, name's Elijah. His father's doing 15 years for armed robbery. His mother's in on drug charges. The boy's been in 3 homes in 1 year. Every single one sent him back." "Why?" "He's angry, B. Violent. Punches walls. Flips tables. Broke a foster father's glasses. His file says high risk. Nobody will touch him." Beatrice was quiet for a moment. She looked around her tiny house. 1 spare bedroom. Barely enough grocery money for herself. "Send him to me." She set up a cot in the living room. When Elijah arrived, tall for 12, jaw clenched, fists tight, eyes that dared you to get close, she pointed to the cot and said, "This is your spot. Nobody's taking it." He didn't believe her. Why would he? Every adult in his life had lied. But Beatrice didn't lie. Within months, Diane called again, and again, and again. Each time, a child no one else would take. Each time, a different reason. Colton was 9. He had a stutter so severe that most people couldn't understand him. In his previous home, a foster parent told him to just stop doing that. He stopped talking entirely, went completely silent. The school labeled him selectively mute. Teachers didn't know what to do. Families didn't want to try. Sawyer was 8. Born with fetal alcohol syndrome, his birth mother drank through the entire pregnancy. He was small for his age, learning disabilities across the board. His official file had a word stamped on it that Beatrice read once and had to put down the paper before she said something she couldn't take back. The word was unadoptable. Nolan was 6. Both his parents died in a house fire. He survived because he was sleeping at a neighbor's house that night. He had night terrors, screaming, thrashing, drenched in sweat. He wet the bed every night. 2 foster families returned him in less than a month. Too disruptive, they said. He was 6. And then there was Theo. Theo was 3 years old. Abandoned at a hospital at 10 months. No known family. No birth certificate on file. He was underweight, behind on every milestone, and diagnosed with failure to thrive. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't reach for people. He didn't cry. And that scared the caseworkers more than crying ever would. Each time Diane called, Beatrice did the math. Grocery money, bed space, school supplies, electricity, gas for the Buick. Each time, the math didn't work. Each time, she said yes. Because somewhere between the numbers on paper and the child on the other end of the phone, there was a kid who needed somebody. And Beatrice Owens could not be the person who said no. 5 boys, 5 reasons nobody wanted them. 1 woman in a 2-bedroom house with a leaking roof and $11 between paychecks. But what Beatrice didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that every single thing she was about to pour into these children would come back to her, multiplied, 20 years from now, on a Saturday morning she never saw coming. But that was later. Right now, she had 5 boys to feed, and the furnace was broken. Now here's where things start to fall apart, because Beatrice could handle the hunger. She could handle the exhaustion. What she couldn't handle was somebody telling her that loving these boys wasn't enough. The first winter with all 5 was brutal. Temperatures in Memphis dropped below 15 degrees for a week straight, and that's when the furnace died. Not sputtered, not slowed down, died. Cold air pushing through the vents like the house was breathing ice. Beatrice couldn't afford a repair. She didn't even call for a quote because she already knew the answer. So she did what she always did. She figured it out. She layered every blanket in the house on the boys' beds. She dragged a space heater into the hallway between the 2 bedrooms and let it run all night. And she slept on the living room floor in her winter coat, next to Elijah's cot, close enough to hear if anyone cried. That week, Theo got sick, a deep, barking cough that rattled his tiny chest. Beatrice drove him to the free clinic in the Buick at 6 in the morning, engine groaning, heat barely working. The doctor said he needed a nebulizer and medication. The cost, even discounted, was more than she had. She paid with the money she'd set aside for the electric bill. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think about it. A child was sick. That was the only math that mattered. When she got home, there was a yellow disconnection notice taped to her front door. And that should have been the worst of it. But it wasn't. because the system was watching. It started in early 2004 with a routine county case review. Beatrice's file got flagged. 5 foster children in a 2-bedroom house. Single income below the poverty line. No second caregiver. Standard red flags on paper. So the county sent someone to look. Her name was Sandra Voss. Case reviewer. Efficient. Professional. Not cruel, but operating strictly by the book. She arrived on a Tuesday morning with a clipboard and a checklist, and she walked through every room in Beatrice's house like she was grading an exam. She noted the 2 bedrooms for 6 people. Elijah is sleeping on a cot in the living room. Colton and Sawyer sharing a twin bed. Nolan and Theo in the other bedroom with Beatrice. She noted the leaking faucet in the kitchen, the space heater in the hallway, a fire code violation. She asked about income. Beatrice showed her the pay stubs from both jobs. Combined, it wasn't enough by the county's formula. She asked about support systems. Beatrice had her neighbor Lorraine, 84 years old, and Pastor Rodney Coles at the church. No family, no partner, no backup plan. Sandra wrote her notes carefully. Then she looked up and said, "Ms. Owens, I can see these children are loved, but the county has standards for space, income, and safety. I have to report what I see." Beatrice's voice was steady, quiet, but every word landed like a stone. Those standards, do they measure whether a child feels safe? Because Elijah stopped punching walls 2 months ago. Colton said his first full sentence in my kitchen last week. Theo laughed for the first time in his life right there by that stove. Does your clipboard have a box for that? Sandra paused. She didn't answer. She finished her form and left. 4 weeks later, a letter arrived. Official county letterhead. Beatrice's foster care license was under review. The recommendation was redistribution, a cold, clinical word that meant they wanted to split the boys up and send them to separate homes that met the county's spatial and financial requirements. Redistribution. 5 boys who had finally stopped being afraid. 5 boys who slept through the night because they knew someone was in the next room. And the state wanted to scatter them across the city like they were inventory. Beatrice fought. She fought hard. Pastor Rodney wrote a letter of support to the county. Lorraine, 84 years old, bad hip, barely able to stand, went down to the county office in person and testified. Diane Presley argued the case from the inside, putting her own job at risk. Beatrice borrowed money she didn't have for a lawyer she couldn't afford. None of it was enough. The county's criteria were numerical: square footage per child, income to dependent ratio, fire safety compliance. Beatrice failed on every single metric. And the fact that 5 deeply traumatized boys were thriving for the first time in their lives, that didn't fit on the form. There was no column for love. No checkbox for "this woman sits outside a child's door every night until he stops being afraid." The system measured walls and dollars. It didn't measure what happened inside them. The ruling came down in the spring of 2004. The boys would be removed and placed in separate homes across the county. And Beatrice Owens, the woman who never said no, couldn't say a single thing to stop it. But the worst part wasn't the ruling. The worst part was the morning they came to take them. And that morning would break her in a way that 20 years couldn't heal. She knew they were coming. She'd known for 2 weeks. And still, when the morning arrived, it didn't feel real. Beatrice woke up at 4 o'clock. The house was dark. The boys were still asleep, all 5 of them, breathing in that uneven rhythm that children have when they're dreaming. She stood in the hallway for a long time, just listening. memorizing the sound, because after today, the house would be silent. She went to the kitchen and started cooking. Pancakes, animal shapes, the way she always made them. A dinosaur for Theo, a bear for Nolan, a dog for Sawyer, a bird for Colton, and plain circles for Elijah, because he always said he was too old for shapes. But he ate them every time. Every single time. She set 5 plates on the table. She poured 5 glasses of milk. She folded 5 napkins. And then she stood at the stove and pressed her palms flat against the counter to keep her hands from shaking. The boys came in one by one, rubbing their eyes, shuffling in socks. Theo climbed into his chair and immediately grabbed his fork. Nolan sat close to Beatrice's empty chair, the way he always did. Sawyer counted his pancakes. He always counted everything. Colton sat quietly and started eating without looking up. Elijah came last. He stood in the kitchen doorway and didn't move. He looked at the 5 plates. He looked at Beatrice. And something passed between them that neither of them said out loud. He knew. He'd known longer than the others, because Elijah always knew when something bad was coming. That's what happens when bad things come early and come often. He sat down. He ate his plain circles. He didn't say a word. Beatrice had ironed their clothes the night before. 5 outfits hung on the backs of 5 chairs. She had packed each boy a bag, not the garbage bags that foster kids usually carry, but real bags. She'd bought them at a thrift store, $2 each. 1 blue, 1 red, 1 green, 1 black, 1 gray. She wrote each boy's name inside with a permanent marker so no one could mix them up. So they'd have something that was theirs. She tucked something into each bag. For Colton, a note that said, "Your voice matters. Use it." For Sawyer, the second-hand phonics book they'd read together every night for a year. For Nolan, a photo of Beatrice holding him in the rocking chair. For Theo, a small stuffed dinosaur she'd found at a yard sale. For Elijah, she didn't pack anything extra, because she knew Elijah. He didn't want objects. He wanted the truth. At 8 o'clock, the county van pulled up outside. 2 caseworkers stepped out, followed by Sandra Voss. They stood on the sidewalk and waited, professional, patient, as if this were just another Tuesday. It wasn't. Beatrice brought the boys to the porch. She knelt down in front of each one. 5 goodbyes, 5 forevers, compressed into seconds. She held Sawyer first. He hugged her so tight she couldn't breathe. She whispered in his ear, "You are smart. Don't let anyone tell you different. You hear me?" He nodded into her shoulder, but couldn't let go. A caseworker had to gently pull him away. She knelt in front of Nolan. He was shaking, not crying, shaking. The way he shook during his night terrors. She took his face in both hands. "You are brave. You survived something that would break most grown men. And you're only 6. You remember that." Colton was crying, silently, the way he did everything, tears running down his face without a sound. Beatrice pulled him close and whispered, "Don't you ever go quiet again. You have things to say. You promise me." He nodded. He couldn't speak, but he nodded. Then she turned to Elijah, the oldest, the angry one. The one who punched walls and broke things and dared the world to give up on him. He wasn't angry now. His jaw was tight, his fists were clenched at his sides, but his eyes were red. He was 12 years old and trying so hard not to cry that his whole body was rigid. Beatrice held his face the way she'd held Nolan's. She looked straight into his eyes. "You are not broken. You never were. Don't you ever let anyone put that word on you. Not a caseworker, not a judge, not anyone. You hear me, Elijah?" He didn't answer. He pulled away. He walked to the van without looking back. But as he passed the refrigerator, the door still open from breakfast, he stopped. He reached up and pulled off a crayon drawing that had been taped there for months. A stick figure woman surrounded by 5 smaller stick figures. Underneath, in his handwriting, "Mama B and us." He folded it carefully and put it in his bag. He didn't say anything about it. He didn't have to.
And then there was Theo, the youngest. 3 years old when he arrived, 4 now. He didn't understand what was happening. He didn't know that the van outside meant he was leaving. He didn't know that redistribution meant he'd wake up tomorrow in a different bed, in a different house, with a different person who didn't know that he liked dinosaur pancakes. Theo just looked up at Beatrice and smiled. A caseworker lifted him into the van. He pressed his small hand against the window and waved. That wave. Those tiny fingers spread wide against the glass. That smile that didn't know it should be breaking. That was the image that would live inside Beatrice Owens for the next 20 years. The van doors closed. Colton turned in his seat and looked through the rear window. His lips moved. 2 words. No sound. His stutter wouldn't let him. But Beatrice read them. She read them perfectly. "Thank you." The van pulled away from the curb. It turned at the end of the dead-end street, and then it was gone. Beatrice stood on the porch. She didn't move. She didn't go inside. Lorraine came over after a while and put an arm around her. Beatrice didn't speak. She couldn't. 20 minutes passed. 30. An hour. Finally, she walked inside. The kitchen table still had 5 plates, 5 forks, 5 napkins. Crumbs from pancakes shaped like animals. And by the front door, 5 pairs of small shoes. Lined up the way she'd taught them. Heels against the wall, laces tucked in. Theo's were the smallest. One sole was coming loose. Beatrice picked up Theo's shoes. She held them to her chest. And for the first time since Lawrence died, she let herself fall apart completely. She sank to the floor, her back against the door, holding those tiny shoes, and she cried until there was nothing left. She didn't move the shoes. Not that day, not that week, not that year, not ever.
Nah, hold on. Stop. I need a second. Because she knew they were taking her boys. She knew. And she still woke up at 4 a.m. to make them pancakes. Bro, that's not kindness. That's something I don't even have a word for. And honestly, I don't think I could have done that. The house didn't feel like a house anymore. It felt like a held breath that nobody let go. Beatrice went back to work the next morning. She had to. The Bills didn't care that her heart was in pieces. She showed up at the school cafeteria at 5 a.m., tied her apron, and served breakfast to other people's children with the same steady hands that had made dinosaur pancakes the day before. Nobody at work knew what happened. She didn't tell them. When a coworker asked why she looked tired, she said she hadn't slept well. That was true. She hadn't slept at all. She'd spent the night sitting in the hallway between the 2 bedrooms, listening to silence where there used to be breathing. She kept the house exactly the way it was.
5 pairs of shoes by the front door, crayon marks on the kitchen wall where Theo had drawn a circle he called a sun, a dent in the drywall from the time Elijah punched it during his first week. She never patched it. She left it because it was proof. Proof that he was here. Proof that he was real. Every month, she sat at the kitchen table and wrote letters. One for Elijah, one for Colton, one for Sawyer, one for Nolan, one for Theo. She didn't know their new addresses. She didn't know if they were together or separated. She didn't know if they were safe. But she wrote the letters anyway. Every single one started the same way. Dear Name, I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. The same words she used to say outside Elijah's bedroom door. She folded each letter neatly, put it in an envelope, wrote the boy's name on the front, and placed it in a shoebox under her bed. Month after month, year after year, the box filled up. She got a second box, then a third. By the end of 20 years, there were over 1,200 letters in those boxes, unsent, unread, written with the same care as if she were placing them directly into their hands. And every year, every single year, on the anniversary of the day they were taken, Beatrice woke up at 4 a.m. and made pancakes. 5 plates, animal shapes, a dinosaur, a bear, a dog, a bird, plain circles. She set them on the table with 5 glasses of milk and 5 folded napkins. She sat down in her chair. She ate 1 plate. The other 4 she wrapped up and left on the front porch. Lorraine saw her do this the first year and didn't say a word. The second year, she brought over coffee and sat with her. By the 5th year, she stopped asking why. She just showed up. People in the neighborhood noticed Beatrice was different after the boys left. Quieter. Not broken. Never broken. But dimmer. Like someone had turned a light down low. She still hummed gospel. She still left food on the porch. She still waved at neighbors who didn't wave back. But there was a weight behind her eyes that wasn't there before. A woman from church once suggested she tell her story to a local news station. People should know what you did, Bea, what the system did to you. You could fight this. Beatrice shook her head. Didn't even think about it. I didn't raise those boys for a news story. I raised them because they needed raising. And I'm not putting their names on television so strangers can feel sorry for us. That was the end of that conversation. She didn't want pity. She didn't want attention. She didn't want recognition. She just wanted to know if her boys were okay. And nobody could give her that. So she kept writing letters no one would read. She kept making pancakes no one would eat. She kept those 5 pairs of shoes lined up by the door, like a prayer she refused to stop saying. And 20 years passed. But what Beatrice didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that she wasn't the only one who remembered. 5 boys, scattered across 5 different cities, were carrying pieces of her with them. And one of them had already started looking. Because here's what Beatrice never found out, not for 20 years. The system that promised those boys something better gave them something worse. The 5 boys were separated the same week they left her porch, sent to different counties, different homes, different lives. The system that said Beatrice's house was too small put Elijah in a group home with 30 kids and 4 staff members who rotated every 6 months. No one sat outside his door. No one told him he wasn't broken. He started punching walls again. Colton went to a family that didn't learn his name for a week. They called him the Quiet One. He didn't speak for 2 years. Sawyer was placed in a special needs facility. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, worksheets instead of conversations. Nobody sat with him at night to read a phonics book. His file still said unadoptable. Nobody crossed it out. Nolan bounced between 3 homes in 2 years. Each one gave up when the night terrors started. Too loud, too much, too broken. He was 8 years old and had already learned that nowhere was permanent. Theo was the only one who got something close to stability. A family in another state adopted him. They were kind. They gave him a room, a bed, a name on a Christmas stocking. But one night, when he was 5, he said a word his adoptive parents had never heard before. Mama B. They asked him who that was. He couldn't explain. He just knew the name meant safe. Every one of those boys carried something from Beatrice's house. Elijah had the crayon drawing, folded, creased, tucked into every backpack and duffel bag he owned for the next 20 years. Colton had a sentence burned into his memory. Your voice matters. Use it. Sawyer had a phonics book held together with tape. Nolan had the feeling of being rocked in a chair by someone who didn't let go. Theo had a name. And in every home they lived in after Beatrice, each boy looked for the same thing without knowing they were looking. Small shoes lined up by a front door. A kitchen that smelled like pancakes in the morning. A voice in the hallway that said, I'm right here. None of them found it. Years passed. The boys became teenagers. The teenagers became men. And one of them, the angry one, the one who punched walls, the one who walked to the van without looking back, started searching. Elijah was 25 years old when he typed a name into a search bar for the first time. Beatrice Owens, Memphis, Tennessee. What he found changed everything. She was still there. Same house, same street, same chain-link fence, same dead-end road in South Memphis. 20 years, and Beatrice Owens had not moved. That detail alone nearly broke Elijah. He was sitting in his office in Nashville, a small firm, nothing fancy, stacks of case files on every surface, when the public records search returned her address. He stared at the screen for a long time. The same address. The exact same address from the day they took him away. She never left. And he knew why. He knew it the way you know something in your bones before your brain catches up. She stayed so they could find her. Elijah was 32 years old. He was a criminal defense attorney. He represented people the system had thrown away. Addicts, repeat offenders, teenagers tried as adults. People whose files said high risk. People who reminded him of himself. He kept the crayon drawing framed on his desk. Every client who sat across from him saw it. Sometimes they asked about it. He always said the same thing. My mother drew it. Well, I drew it for her. He hadn't called Beatrice. Not yet. Because showing up alone wasn't enough. He needed to find the others first. It took him 3 years. Colton was the easiest to find. He was in Atlanta, working as a speech therapist at a children's hospital. He helped kids with stutters, kids who went silent, kids who had been told their whole lives that something was wrong with the way they talked. His office had one piece of decoration on the wall, a framed sentence written in a woman's handwriting. Your voice matters. Use it. When Elijah called him, Colton didn't stutter once. He listened. He was quiet for 10 seconds. Then he said, "Tell me when." Sawyer was in Charlotte. He'd become an educational consultant, specializing in children with learning disabilities. Kids the system called slow. Kids whose files got stamped with words that closed doors instead of opening them. He traveled to schools across the Southeast, training teachers to see potential where paperwork only showed problems. He still carried the phonics book in his briefcase, battered,
taped together, pages soft from years of turning. The cat sat on the mat, page 1. The first sentence he ever read out loud, sitting at a kitchen table in South Memphis with a woman who never once told him to hurry. When Elijah found him, Sawyer said one thing: "I still have the book." Nolan was in Dallas. He was a firefighter. He'd chosen the profession the way some people choose a religion, not because it was easy, but because it answered something inside him that nothing else could. "Nobody saved my parents," he told his crew once. "I couldn't do anything. I was 6, but I'm not 6 anymore." In 5 years, he'd pulled 11 people out of burning buildings. Every single time, the moment he lifted someone into his arms, he thought about a rocking chair and a woman who held him through the screaming.
When Elijah called, Nolan didn't say, "Tell me when." He said, "Tell me where. I'll drive tonight."
Theo was the hardest to find. Different state, different last name. Adopted. The records were sealed. It took Elijah 14 months and a legal petition to unseal the adoption file. When he finally tracked Theo down, he was in Chicago, 23 years old, a pediatrician, still in residency, working 80-hour weeks at a children's hospital. He specialized in failure to thrive cases: babies who didn't eat, toddlers who didn't grow, kids who didn't cry, kids who were exactly like he used to be. Theo didn't remember much from Beatrice's house. He was too young. But he remembered a name: Mama B. He remembered the smell of pancakes, and he remembered laughing. He couldn't remember what was funny. He just remembered that it was the first time. And sometimes, when he was alone in the hospital break room at 2 in the morning, that memory was the only thing that kept him going. When Elijah called him and said, "I found her," Theo was quiet for a long time. Then he asked one question: "Does she still make the dinosaur ones?" Elijah couldn't answer. He was crying too hard. It took 6 months to plan. 5 men in 5 cities with 5 different schedules and 5 different lives, but one shared understanding. This wasn't going to be a visit. This wasn't going to be a phone call or a card or a check in the mail. This was going to be a return, a real one, the kind that changes things permanently. They talked every week on a group call. They pooled money. They hired an architect. They contacted nonprofits. They filed paperwork. They argued about details and agreed on everything that mattered. And they agreed on one rule: Beatrice could not know. Not until they were standing on her porch. Not until she could see their faces. All 5 of them, together, for the first time in 20 years. Elijah said it best on one of those calls.
His voice was steady, the way Beatrice's voice had been steady on the morning she knelt in front of him and told him he wasn't broken. "She kept our shoes by the door for 20 years. She wrote us letters every month that she couldn't even send. She made pancakes every year on the day we left. She never moved. She never stopped. The least we can do is show up." October 2024. A Saturday morning. 5 black SUVs turned onto a dead-end street in South Memphis, and Beatrice Owens was watering her rose bush. She didn't recognize them at first. Why would she? The last time she saw these faces, they belonged to children. Small hands, baby teeth, shoes that fit in the palm of her hand. Now, 5 men stood on the sidewalk in front of her house. Tall, broad-shouldered, grown. Beatrice set down the garden hose. She squinted against the morning sun. 5 suits, 5 pairs of polished shoes on cracked concrete.
Something about the way the tallest one stood, shoulders tense, jaw tight, hands at his sides like he was bracing for impact, made her breath catch. Then he spoke. One word. The name that only 5 people in the world had ever used. Mama B. The garden hose hit the ground. Water pooled around her slippers. She grabbed the porch railing with both hands because her legs stopped working. She looked from face to face, and the years peeled away like paint. Elijah? A whisper, then louder. Colton? Sawyer? Nolan? Her voice cracked on the last name. Theo? Theo stepped forward. He was 23 now, a doctor. But right now, he was 4 years old again, standing in a kitchen that smelled like pancakes. He was holding something, a piece of paper, faded and taped at the corners. A crayon drawing of a stick figure woman surrounded by 5 smaller stick figures. Underneath, in a child's handwriting, Mama B and Us. Beatrice's knees gave out. All 5 men caught her. 10 hands. The same hands she used to wash and bandage and hold kept her from hitting the ground. She grabbed their arms, their shoulders, their faces. She touched each one like she was checking if they were real. She said their names over and over. Elijah, Colton, Sawyer, Nolan, Theo. Like a prayer she'd been holding in her mouth for 20 years and could finally say out loud. Then she asked the only question that mattered. Are you okay? Are all of you okay? Elijah smiled, and one by one they told her. Elijah went first. I'm a lawyer, Mama B. Criminal defense. I represent people the system gave up on. He paused. You used to sit outside my door every night and say you weren't going anywhere. I do the same thing now. I sit with my clients and I tell them the exact same words. Because you were right. That's all anyone needs to hear. Colton stepped forward. He spoke clearly, slowly, no stutter. I'm a speech therapist. I work with kids who can't talk, kids who went silent the way I did. His voice shook, not from the stutter, but from everything underneath it. You never told me to hurry. You just hummed with me until the words came. I do that with every kid I treat. I hum with them first, just like you. Sawyer reached into his briefcase and pulled out something Beatrice hadn't seen in 20 years. The phonics book. Battered, taped together, pages worn soft. He held it up. Page 1. The cat sat on the mat. You read that with me 200 times, and you never got tired. He opened it to the first page. I work with kids like me now. Kids they call unadoptable. I show them this book, and I tell them about a woman who sat with me every single night until I could read. Nolan stood straight, the way firefighters stand. I'm a firefighter, Mama B. 11 rescues in 5 years. His voice dropped. I couldn't save my parents. I was 6. There was nothing I could do. But every time I carry someone out of a burning building, I think about you carrying me to that rocking chair. You taught me what saving someone looks like, not with a hose or a ladder, with your arms. And then Theo, the youngest, the one who didn't cry, the one who waved through a van window with a smile that didn't know it should be breaking. I'm a pediatrician.
he said. "I work with kids who don't grow, kids who don't eat, kids who don't cry." He smiled, the same smile, 20 years later. "You made me dinosaur pancakes, and I laughed for the first time in my life. I didn't even know what laughing was before you. That's why I do this, because every kid deserves someone who makes them laugh." Beatrice couldn't speak. She looked at these 5 men, built from her pancakes and her patience and her prayers, and she understood something she'd been afraid to believe for 20 years. It wasn't wasted. None of it. Not the sleepless nights, not the empty bank account,
Not the letters she couldn't send, not the shoes she wouldn't move. Every single thing she gave them, they carried it. They built lives out of it. They became the proof. But they weren't done. Elijah handed her an envelope. Inside, the deed to her house, paid off every dollar. The mortgage she'd been chipping away at for 30 years, gone. Beatrice shook her head. "Boys, I don't need." Elijah stopped her. His voice was gentle but firm, the voice of a man who had argued in courtrooms and won. "Mama B, you have spent your entire life giving things away and refusing things back. You returned every kindness anyone ever tried to hand you. Not this time." He looked at his brothers. "We're not asking. This is done." Beatrice held the envelope. She didn't open it. She pressed it against her chest, the way she once pressed Theo's tiny shoes. But the deed was only the beginning, because Elijah nodded to Nolan, and Nolan walked to the back of the SUV and pulled out a rolled-up tube of paper. Architectural blueprints. And that's when everything changed. Nolan unrolled the blueprints on the porch steps. The paper spread wide across the concrete, clean lines, measurements, room labels. Beatrice looked down at it and didn't understand what she was seeing. Not at first. Elijah knelt beside her. "This is the Owens house, Mama B. We built it for you. Well, we built it because of you." The Owens house. A family-style foster care home, 3 blocks from Beatrice's bungalow in the same neighborhood where she'd raised them. Not a group home, not a facility, a house. Designed around everything Beatrice had taught them without ever knowing she was teaching. Small scale, a maximum of 8 children, never more, because Beatrice showed them that children don't need buildings. They need someone who knows their name. Consistent caregivers who commit for years, not months. No rotating staff. No strangers every 6 weeks. Because Beatrice never rotated. She was there every morning and every night. She was the constant. Home-cooked meals in a real kitchen. Not a cafeteria line. Not a microwave and a tray. A table with chairs and plates and napkins. Because Beatrice taught them that sitting down together is how a family is built. Each child gets their own space, a bed, a shelf, a hook for their coat. Because Beatrice packed each of them a bag with their name written inside. She taught them that having something that's yours matters. A reading room, Sawyer's idea. A music corner, Colton's. A garden out back, because Beatrice always had one. A workshop where kids could build things with their hands. Nolan pushed for that. And a small medical corner, Theo's contribution, for checkups, screenings, and making sure no child slips through the cracks the way he almost did. And by the front door, a shoe rack. 5 pairs minimum, always. The total cost was $1.8 million. All 5 brothers had pooled their savings. Elijah connected them with nonprofits through his legal work.
Nolan's fire station ran a fundraiser. Colton's hospital matched donations. Sawyer secured a federal grant for foster care innovation. Theo donated his entire signing bonus from the hospital. They asked Beatrice to be the founding house mother. Salaried, benefits, a pension, a title, a voice in every decision. "Nobody knows what these kids need better than you," Elijah said. "You wrote the playbook. We just followed it." Beatrice stared at the blueprints for a long time. She traced the rooms with her finger. The kitchen, the reading room, the shoe rack. She didn't say anything for so long that Colton thought she was going to say no. Then, Nolan walked back to the SUV one more time. He came back carrying a box.
A shoebox. Not Beatrice's shoebox, but the same kind, same size, same shape. He set it on the porch beside her. "Open it," Theo said. She lifted the lid. Inside, letters. Hundreds of them. Handwritten, folded neatly, envelopes with names on the front. 1,200 letters. Every letter Beatrice had written over 20 years. Elijah had recovered them through Diane Presley, who had kept copies in the case file all along. He gave copies to each brother. They read every single one. And then they wrote back. Every letter Beatrice sent, they answered. 20 years late, but answered. Beatrice picked up one at random, a reply from Colton to a letter she'd written when he would have been 14. She read it out loud, barely above a whisper. "Dear Mama B, you asked if I was using my voice. I am, every single day, because of you." She closed the box. She pressed it to her chest. She couldn't read any more. She looked at the blueprints again. She looked at the 5 men. She looked at the shoe rack in the architect's drawing. And then she said something that surprised all of them. "I don't need the money. I never needed money. I just needed to know you were okay." Her voice cracked. "And you're more than okay." She straightened her back. She wiped her face. And the woman who never said no said it one more time. "But those children, the ones in the system right now, the ones sleeping in group homes tonight, the ones whose files say they're too much, they need this. So yes, I'll do it." She accepted. Not for herself, for every child who was ever told they were unwanted. And 6 months later, the Owens house opened its doors. The morning the Owens house opened, the first child arrived at 7 a.m. A 6-year-old girl. Brown hair, skinny arms, a garbage bag of belongings dragged behind her like it weighed more than she did. She stood on the porch and didn't move. Her eyes were wide and empty, the way Theo's eyes had been 20 years ago. Beatrice was waiting at the door. She knelt down, the same way she'd knelt on a different porch in front of different children a lifetime ago, and said, "Come on in, baby. Are you hungry?" She made pancakes, dinosaur shape. The girl ate 3. Within a year, the Owens house was full, 8 children. Each one arrived the same way, scared, angry, silent, or some combination of all 3. And Beatrice handled each one the same way she always had. She didn't rush them. She didn't fix them. She just stayed. A 10-year-old boy showed up with fists like Elijah's, tight, ready, waiting for a reason. His first night, he locked himself in his room and wouldn't come out. Beatrice pulled a chair into the hallway, sat down, and said the words she'd said 1,000 times before. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." He opened the door on the 3rd night. Sandra Voss visited the Owens house that first year.
She walked through the rooms slowly. She saw the kitchen, the reading corner, the garden out back. She saw the shoe rack by the front door, 8 pairs, different sizes, lined up neat. She stood in front of it for a long time. Then she turned to Beatrice and said, quietly, "I wish I had seen this model back then. I'm sorry, Miss Owens." Beatrice looked at her. 20 years between them. 20 years of silence and loss and letters that were never sent. She could have said 100 things. She said 5 words. "Help me build more of them." One evening, after a long day, Beatrice came home to her bungalow. Something was different. She looked down at the porch. 5 pairs of shoes were lined up by her front door. Not children's shoes. Men's shoes, dress shoes, work boots, sneakers, running shoes, loafers. 1 pair from each of her boys. A note was taped to the door, in Elijah's handwriting. "We finally outgrew the old ones, but we'll always come back to this door." She brought them inside. She set them down next to the 5 tiny pairs that had been there for 20 years, small and large, side by side. The whole story told in 10 pairs of shoes. And on the refrigerator at the Owens house, 2 crayon drawings hung side by side. The new one by the 6-year-old girl, Miss B and us. And next to it, faded and taped at the corners, the original, Mama B and us. 2 drawings, 20 years apart. The same love. Yo, real talk. This story broke me. Like, actually broke me. She wrote letters for 20 years, knowing nobody would read them. She made pancakes for kids who weren't even there. That's not a story. That's a whole different level of love. And I'm still thinking about it. I probably will be for a while. So let me ask you something. Who's your Beatrice? Who loved you when they didn't have to? Drop their name in the comments. They deserve to be seen. And if this story hit you somewhere real, if it reminded you that the small things aren't small, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe if you haven't yet. We tell stories like this every single week. Because the world has more Beatrices than you think. You just have to look.